Welcome to the next episode of Grit Rising. Today I have Rachel Fine Wilson with me today to talk a lot about family business, how she's got to where she is, and the innovative concept she's created that's kind of changing the Florida landscape. So Rachel, I'm going to turn it over to you for a quick intro and then we'll get into it.
Thanks, Trent. As you mentioned, my name is Rachel Fine Wilson. I live in the Tampa, Florida area where I have a beautiful restaurant, bar, and one-screen classic movie theater called Gigglewaters, which is kind of a throwback prohibition term to alcohol. It's an award-winning concept. We've got about 50 culinary awards to date, going on our 6th year of operation. We also have a 30-foot food truck and a non-traditional kiosk kind of store in a music venue. So that's kind of where we are right now. We're launching the next phase of our career right now, which is franchising. And it's a very exciting moment for us. That
is very exciting. And the main partners are you, your husband, and your father, correct?
Yes.
How did that come about?
My father has been in restaurants forever. It's really kind of a family legacy. He started working for his uncles, my great uncles, Sam and Charlie, who started a chain of fast food burger restaurants called the White Hut in Toledo, Ohio. There were 7 of them, started in the 1940s, and my dad was peeling onions and working there since he was a child. He stayed in the restaurant business for a long time. I like to joke with him. One of my first memories is being 4 years old in one of his biker bars that he had bought. He had a wild collection of restaurants and bars at that time. Sitting at the bar, and he let me try beer for the first time at 4. So I like to ride him about that all the time. But I grew up in his properties. So at that beer barrel, I remember being in the back office playing on his big calculators for hours. And when I was in 7th grade, he owned or operated one called Hacienda del Sol, which was a guest ranch resort in Tucson, Arizona, that had been completely abandoned. But in the early 1900s, Clark Gable stayed there. John Wayne stayed there. It had this huge history, and he kind of brought it back to life. So I grew up running around his properties, hotel and restaurant management. At one point, he ran 75 hotels in Arizona, California, and Nevada. So it was really in the blood. My first job general, was in the area I live in now, actually, at a place called Peg Leg Pete's that he operated. I was working as a bus girl there. So it's been in our blood for a long time. My dad left the restaurant industry when I went to college and got my undergrad. He got his degree in counseling and became a therapist and became a first responder. So he, anytime there's a national crisis, 9/11, he counseled 1,200 people the first week in New York City. He is there to respond to those kind of things. So he'd been out of the restaurant business. He had escaped the restaurant business for some time. And I was moving back to Florida from New York City with my husband. And we were kicking around what we wanted to do with this chapter of our lives. And we decided we wanted to open this concept. And I called him and said, Dad, want to do restaurants again? And we laughed about it. And he said, what the hell? And he said, yeah. And so he picked up from Orlando, moved over to the Clearwater area with us. We're in a little town called Safety Harbor. And the 3 of us did it together. And I'm really blessed. If my dad wasn't my dad, he'd be my best friend. We're very, very similar. We have a great time working together. It's a really fun dynamic.
Who's the alpha of the family?
Probably me. There are definitely times that my dad and I can go head to head, but we can debate knowing we're coming from wanting the best for the business. And so it's always, I think this is the best approach. I think this is the best approach. All right. And we kind of default to who cares more about that, who has more value in that debate and says that this is really important, this marketing strategy or this approach is really important. Usually he'll fight harder on an operational issue. I'll fight harder on a marketing issue. And generally we come to a consensus that we're better for having that back and forth because of that, right? So we'll push and pull a little bit and come to a better place because of that.
If you were to go back and go, where did you get the tendency to become the alpha over your father? Meaning that we grow up with our dads being, generally in charge and telling us what to do and how to do it and why we did it wrong the next day and how they would have done it better. What do you think made that change for you?
That wasn't a change. That's how he raised me.
Yeah.
I remember when I was a kid, him telling me all the time, you can be president of the United States if you want. He never brought me up to be lesser than or to raise his opinion above mine. He helped me. I would take a goal or want to do something, and he would support me wholeheartedly and say, you're going to do that. I remember in third grade, I started a petition for equal rights for kids. I don't even know what that means, but it was very important to me at the time. And he said, yeah, write it up. Let's go door to door. I mean, anything I wanted to do or thought was important, he was my biggest cheerleader, my biggest supporter. So there was never a time in which I felt I deferred to my dad's leadership, which will probably piss him off when I say that. But it's his fault. He raised me to have chutzpah, as he would say, or grit, as you would say, and to push for what I believed in. And so the result of that now is a style of leadership, I think, that doesn't look at why something won't work, but tries to find a way it will, and to push through when things get tough.
And so you have that dynamic, and then you have your husband, who you go home with every day. And when we talked earlier, you said your husband's more the creative side. When does he assert his alpha or his authority into the situation?
We really don't have that hard of a push-pull. Everyone kind of has their lane, right? My husband is the movies for sure. That is his area of expertise. He is the movie geek of the three of us. So when it comes to choosing the film schedules, coming up with and doing all the licensing and dealing with the movies in general, that's really his arena. He's also extraordinarily creative. He has a ton of ideas. Some of them are wacky and ridiculous, and some of them are absolute genius. And I'm the one who kind of executes on his crazy ideas. And so there are some where he'll fire 3 or 4 at me, and I'm like, okay, put these in a file, and yes, we should do them, but we can't do them right now. Let me do one at a time. This is the one we want to move with. An example of that is we did a project called the Cinema Supper series recently. We launched, and it's so exciting. Essentially, we watch a film with an audience. We have 32 people in our movie theater, and we follow every food and drink cue of the entire movie. So the guests who come in don't order anything. Anything that's served on screen, you're eating in that moment. And so he goes through and pulls all of the cues for that and sets it up and puts that together. Our first one was Pulp Fiction. It was so much fun. The only choice that the audience had was on the steak if they wanted it burnt to a crisp or bloody as hell, because that's a question that's asked in the film, right? Everything else was curated. Even on the scene where Uma Thurman has the syringe in her heart, we dropped plastic syringes filled with bees' knees. We did alcohol in them. And it hits at that exact moment. So it's a fun, curated adventure, and those are his kind of brainchild.
Got it. So if you're talking to a family business out there, give like a couple of the pitfalls and the best parts.
You know, I haven't had a pitfall, and maybe that's an exception, not the rule, because we really like each other. And like, I know that's not everyone's family dynamic, but that's ours. And so we have a lot of fun. Honestly, I get to work with my favorite people in the world. You spend more time at work than you do at home. So for me to get to spend that time with the people I love is amazing to me. It's amazing to me that I come in the morning, every morning I grab a cup of coffee and I plop down in my dad's office and kick my feet up and say, how's it going? What's new? And we just get a second to connect as people before we're just hitting it hard with business. But we have the same drive and passion for what we're doing. You share the stakes with your family. I mean, that's a huge benefit. You're all so invested in your family's legacy together. And so I couldn't be more grateful. I didn't see this moment happening in my life. I couldn't have predicted this moment, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Now you go to like Thanksgiving dinner, you're talking about Gigglewaters, or you're talking about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers?
Well, it's never sports for me, so it's probably, but it's always business. That is probably the hardest part. It's hard for me to turn it off, but we enjoy it, so it doesn't feel like work, right? So the hard part is for the other people at the table, for my sisters, for whoever else is there who have their own lives. I can just turn to my dad and we get on this idea and we kick it back and forth and we get so into it that it can be exclusionary, or it can be, it's hard for me to turn it off. And that's the truth, because we're always together.
Yeah, it's unique. I'm part of a second generation business. My brother worked with us for a little bit, wasn't into what we did as a business, and has gone off and become a successful entrepreneur. Couldn't imagine working with my sisters. But as I think about into the future of like my own kids, whether or not they want to do it, I've always maintained they're not even allowed to work with me for 5-6 years. They need to go do their own thing.
Yes.
What would be your advice there?
100%. And I've said that to my kids. My kids are 7 and 9. And they said, when I asked them, what do you want to be when you grow up? They say, I'm going to work at Gigglewaters. And I said, not first. You're going to go have a career first, at least 5 years. Because I also think for the longevity of the company, you can't just bring someone in who has no external experience into a leadership capacity and expect them to bring something new or fresh or innovative into it, right? Go find what you want to be, go learn something valuable, and then bring that work ethic and the things that you've learned into the company, into the family business. I don't want them to just grow into it. I want them to, certainly they can work their way through high school, waiting tables and bartending and doing all those things, but maybe not bartending in high school, bartending a little later. But certainly, I think there's a benefit to them and to the company for them to work somewhere else first.
With your dad's institutional knowledge of the restaurant world and you coming from outside the restaurant world, there's got to be friction sometimes because he feels like he knows it and you're bringing in new ideas that don't work or are going to work, or
we're really good at the yes and. Sometimes you have an initial response of, no, that's never going to work. We can both have that, right? And I go, okay, this is going to sound crazy. Just breathe with me for a second. Hear this crazy idea, have your response, and then figure out how we're going to make this happen. Because I think on a long enough trajectory, anything can work, right? Like I don't think anything is shut down with a hard no. And we're not hard no people. We are people who want to game it out for a second and figure out how we could do it if we were to do it, if it was the right move. And so we just bat things around. And especially my dad and I, because I joke that we share the same brain, we process things the same way, we think the same way in a lot of things, that we kind of have a shortcut of language where we just game that through to the end. And sometimes it's a good idea that we're talking about. Sometimes it's an idea that we walk through and we go, you know what, this isn't the best idea for the company. Let's walk away from that deal, or let's not do that. But nothing is shut down immediately. Everything is thought thoroughly.
And so you take that same concept and you go to like a business book like Good to Great, where they say, hey, there's healthy conflict that exists in a successful business. As you go to the next phase, which is your own business that you understand, to that franchisor, which not only has repercussions, because if somebody's buying a franchise, they're generally taking together their life savings or whatever it is and basically betting on you to do that right. But how do you take that healthy friction and allow that to go down to your franchisees?
So I have some experience in franchising that I think is really relevant to this part of the conversation. And that is that, there was a time in my life where I worked in the supplemental education industry with a couple different companies in K-12 and then in test prep and then back in K-12. The pinnacle of that, I was serving as vice president of operations for the U.S. stores and working specifically with franchisees in turnaround management. So in the first year, I was in 32 units, helping the franchisees who were struggling turn it around. And what I noticed was they would succeed while I was there, because I would lift them up and say, here's what we're doing today. Here's how we're going to hit it hard. Here's what the marketing looks like. Here's how we're going to address it. And then it would fall off as I left, right? They would stop doing the marketing or just feel frustrated or whatever it was. And what I really saw was what can go wrong in franchising. Particularly if the company kind of takes the check from whoever, wherever, and they are in a race for more units, or they, grow it with no strategy behind it, and they take a check in Illinois and they take a check in Chicago or in New York or all across the country, and don't have any strategy behind what that growth plan is. And the reality of that really stuck with me. It stuck with me because these were really good people who put their life savings into opening this concept that might not have been right for them, with a franchise team that didn't necessarily vet them thoroughly to see if this was the right fit. And you can't do much to help when you have somebody who's in a situation that isn't right for them, other than help guide them towards an exit, really. And it turned me off to franchising, to be honest with you. In fact, when we talked about strategic growth, my father and I, my husband, when we sat down and strategized what the next 5 years and 10 years of the company looked like, it for a long time was not franchising at all. It was corporate growth entirely, because in that situation, I didn't have the power to change employees, to bring somebody else in, right? You're stuck with this person, you're married to this person. And if that's the wrong fit, how do you extricate yourself from that person? And someone pushed me and said, this is a really good concept. You should think about franchising it. And it got me thinking, what if I approached it differently? What if I slowed down the growth and I wasn't in the race to 100? And what if I wasn't trying to acquire as many locations as possible? And I really thought about support, and I really thought about systems and making things as close to a QSR model as possible for a full service restaurant and bar, and made things as turnkey as possible, and looked at vetting my franchisees and finding people that meshed with our core values as a company that would be a good fit. And we did really slow, steady growth in concentric circles around us so I could be on site and hold their hand and help and make sure that they weren't just flying blind, 6 hours away from me, 10 hours away. So looking at that from that approach turned me on to franchising from a different perspective and made me think, I see the value in growing this way. I just want to take my time with it. I want to find the right people. And I think that the people that we do choose, I think will appreciate the dynamic that my father and I have. And I think that they will see the value that my strengths lie in the growth of the company, and his lie in the operation of the company. And together we're a really good partnership.
And if I understood you correctly, when you were doing turnaround franchise, the number one issue you saw with failing franchises or ones that need to be turned around is execution?
I think it's always execution, right? Whether it's marketing execution or operational execution, it is either not having a playbook that can be executed or not choosing to execute that playbook, right? That's what the issues are going to come down to. Either the system is not in place or the Z is not following the system. It's one of the two. What I've really strived to do over the last few years is tightening every single system I can to make this as easily replicable as possible for an average operator. That's been my strategic goal from that perspective. I saw a lot of different reasons why people struggled. And I think a lot of them came down to fit. A lot of them came down to maybe there's a perception of it being an absentee ownership and it's not, or that this was the capital that was required and it was really much more than that. And they weren't, they didn't have the depth of financial wherewithal to weather the off seasons, things like that. So, there are a lot of reasons that it doesn't work for people in systems. And I think that was a great education for me to know what I will do differently. And it's helped us take the last few years of strategic planning to make sure that we can really provide support for our franchisees. I don't want to just take a check and throw them a territory. It matters to me that they're successful.
How much do you think passion into what you're doing plays into the execution? And what I mean by that, if somebody's looking at Zoom Room franchise where you're training dogs, or Gigglewaters where you're operating a movie theater and a bar and a restaurant, or a Jersey Mike's, those are three totally different franchises. As people are looking at investing and getting into it, how much do you think passion around that specific business is critical to getting to that execution that you talk about?
I think it's huge. I think you have to care. I think you have to care about your community. I think you have to care about what the business is. I think passion is what drives us, right? Otherwise, you could do something very rote all day, every day, and I think you would. And I'm sure that there's easy ways to make money. Nobody says that the restaurant business is a simple way to live your life, right? Restaurants are crazy, but the people who have restaurants in their blood wouldn't have it any other way. They feel the excitement of walking out on a Friday night and your bar and restaurant is hopping and people are having the time of their lives, and you feel honored and excited to be a part of that. And I think that is 100% passion.
As if I'm a family and I say, hey, this sounds really great, I want to go in and do this franchise. Not all families don't have a lot of dysfunction. And so as you're vetting people that are, coming into business, and let's say you have another father-daughter and you see that it doesn't go as smoothly as you and your father, that's gonna be interesting as a franchisor to be like, how do I give them the help that they need when they have much deeper stuff going on?
And I think that's key to taking the time to choose the right people. And make sure that it's the right fit for them. I would say any dynamic in which there was obvious tension in the franchising discovery day process, I would have some hesitancy towards, right? Because nothing's going to add more pressure than a business and than becoming a franchisee of any concept. So So yeah, I think you want as healthy and dynamic as possible going into something like this. You want to make sure that it's a team that both husband and wife are on board, or father and daughter are on board, that this is both of their passions and that they're excited about it. I think that's, I can teach you the skills, but I can't give you the passion or the excitement or the propensity to want to work with your partner, right? You have to come to the table liking the people you're working with, for sure.
Yeah. Now, Florida, maybe not as much as California, but you have a different mindset. When I grew up, family business was what it was all about, right? Like second, third generation was very, like a very prideful thing. In America today, I feel like sometimes that's the other way, like, oh, because your dad was in restaurants, you're successful. You and I know that's not the truth, but it certainly puts a chip on my shoulder where people, even close to me sometimes will make those comments, whether they're joking or serious. How do you handle that internally?
I can't say that that's ever hit me in that regard. I think I feel really grateful for his expertise. I think he has taught me so much in the last almost 6 years. I think our ramp up period would have taken me a lot. I think I could have gotten here. It would have taken me a lot longer to understand the shortcut of having my father say, okay, it's day one. Let's talk about food costing and labor costing and models, and have the depth and breadth of experience that he had. Bringing that to the table was a huge benefit. And I hope that if my children, after they go follow their own passions first, decide to come into the family business, I hope to be able to give them the same education that he was able to give me. So I think it's a wonderful thing. I think family business and that generational business is a terrific. I think that's only a benefit, right? He's had a ton to teach me, and I'm grateful for all of it.
From the outside, that's a dream, right? As a father to a daughter, to work with my daughter one day would be an absolute dream. I don't know if she would ever do that, but what do you think? Like, if you're giving advice, is the number one quality that he possessed in terms of making this happen, where that dynamic works so well, and where he, as a father, instilled within you to have this quality of a relationship that you can work in stressful environments like a startup business, and at the same time want to talk about it at Thanksgiving dinner?
He, one of the things my father brings to a room when he walks in, besides a magnanimous personality, is laughter. He's a funny guy, and he puts you at ease, and he's not a drill sergeant who's coming at you. He's just fun. So I think that the fun comes first for us, and we enjoyed this. We really love looking at this from 30,000 feet and dreaming big together. I think where we differ, and where I've really benefited from him in one regard, is the things that would terrify me don't even faze him. And I've learned a lot in that. I have a sticky note on my desk that says, "It's just a thing," which is something he said to me. I was worried about something. I don't remember what it was, a lease negotiation or something. And I was in a panic. Oh my God, what's going to happen? And he said, "It's just a thing. It's just a thing. We'll figure it out." And there's no stress around that, right? And so okay, let me internalize that. It's just a thing. We got this. And that's given me, I think, a good approach to, there are, slings and arrows, certainly, of business ownership and development, and not letting the scary moments scare you. And I hope that I can teach my kids that someday.
And if he were in the interview or on the podcast, and I would ask him the same thing about what you bring to him, what would he say? Marketing.
That he tells me on a daily basis he's never met a better marketer. That growth and development is in my blood, and I understand how to communicate to the public in a way that brings them in on our story and our growth. That I've come up with creative ideas and am able to communicate that effectively. And I think that when he was running restaurants, we didn't have the benefit of social media at the time, right? You had to take out an ad in a newspaper or throw a big event and hope that you could get some newspaper coverage of it. And I think that he is really mind blown to see what we can create and how we can utilize local PR and the news stations, and how we can do newsworthy things and get coverage for those things and grow the business. And that's something that he's never done before. So that's where I teach him.
And that leads back into what you were saying earlier, your prior career of being in marketing with the next big thing, and now getting into where you are today, versus coming directly in and learning everything you know from your own father. I know for me, I went to go work at Merrill Lynch before I came to work in the family business, and getting that corporate experience, getting that outside perspective it allowed me to think bigger, and I think that's been what's been great versus just learning exactly what he did from that standpoint. So if you had superpowers that you were to label for you, your dad, and your husband, what are those superpowers?
Richie is creativity for sure. I am marketing and growth and vision, and my father is operations. Those are really our superpowers for sure. And it's such a nice combination, the way that comes together, because if we had the same superpowers and we were lacking one, we would be in trouble. But I think we all bring something really unique to the table, and that builds out a leadership team that I believe is one of a kind.
And as you now pass on to the next generation, to your kids, in terms of working with your dad and your husband, what do you think is the one big thing you've learned that says, as a result of this, I'm going to make sure that they learn this from me as well?
I think, grit being the topic of this podcast is huge. One of the things my father really instilled in me is that no doesn't mean no. It means not now. And there have been many no's. Back from the build out of our first unit, the 18 months it took to figure out a smoke wall plan, and the things, the crap you go through, right, in opening your first business, you have to persevere. You have to push through. You have to hear the no and dismiss it and go, okay, not now. How are we working around that? You can't let anyone else shut you down. You can't substitute anyone else's judgment for your own. He really drilled that into me, and that confidence into me. And that's something that is really, I think, critical for me to give to my kids, is to know that nobody's determining whether this will work or not work but you. So get up, find another way to do it, and keep going.
And that's hard in today's world. I mean, I know, for me, my first job was a paper route, and the best part about the paper route is I had to go collect money. And when you learn at that age to go ask somebody for money, that's a pretty good life skill to have. And then when I tell my daughter, hey, go borrow sugar from the neighbors, and she looks at me like I just said the most preposterous thing on planet Earth. You want me to go to knock on a door and ask for sugar? Why don't you just get on DoorDash and just order it? And I'm like, because that's ridiculous. Just go ask Christine for some sugar, and she's going to be happy that you came by and said hi. And in today's world where everything's at our fingertips, and it's easy to say no, there is an easier way than I'm going to run through that door. It's going to be a big challenge on us. Mine are 22 and 18, so a little bit ahead of yours, but I think that's going to be interesting as our kids grow up and learning there's a different way than something they can look, touch, or make happen right away, right?
100%. It's so funny when I challenge them with a question and they say, hey, Alexa, to give the answer. And I'm like, no, I want you to think about this. I want you to formulate an answer. So yeah, you're not wrong. I don't know how that will.
Great things in that, but then there's that critical problem solving that,
Right. And you have to hit a couple walls to find kind of the soft spot of where you can push and where you can get around something. And that takes some moxie. So I hope that we can all instill that in our kids, because I think it makes the world a better place, right? I mean, we all push past the hard problems. We don't give up when things get hard. We keep going. And I hope to instill that in my kids.
Yeah. I think coming out of COVID, the one thing that when I talk to people, they talk about the one thing that COVID gave them was freedom, right? Freedom of, they're not coming in the office from 8 to 5. They're working remote. They're maybe different hours. They're working out at different times. They're traveling at different times. And so the one thing that having a small business, specifically franchise business, does is give you freedom. But at the same time, I don't think people realize how hard it is to get started and from that. So if you're talking to somebody who's listening to it that's thinking about a franchise, what are a couple of questions that you're saying this is what you need to answer to yourself before you come into this business?
Well, I think, speaking first to COVID, I don't think there was a scarier industry to be in than food service during COVID. Maybe maybe movie theaters, but I had that too. So it was a terrifying experience for us, right? I think every restaurant owner still has a little PTSD from that experience. For me, that really got me to focus in a survival place. I mean, we had just finalized an FDD maybe a couple of weeks before COVID. We were launching, we were on the top of the world, and then a week later the restaurant shut down. And I felt like everything I built was about to slip through my fingers. And knowing that we came through that, and we came through that really well, gives me confidence that I'm not afraid of anything that can come up. We started feeding the front lines before that was a hashtag. So I sat there and said, what I have is food, and I want to help. And I'm not a scientist, and I don't know what else. I'm not a doctor. I don't know what I can do, but I can feed people. You look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and food is right there. I can feed people. I can give people comfort. What we do is comfort food. And who can I feed? And what can I do with this freezer full of food? And so, I started taking food to every first responder, to every hospital, to every paramedics hub, to firefighters, to police stations, to every break room of essential workers. We did free lunch for anyone who was unemployed. We could pull up and we just handed up sack lunch through your door. And literally we did this all day, every day. And it got to the point where I turned it into a business for us, where I went to a bank and said, hey, do you want to sponsor a delivery to an emergency room? They haven't had anything. No one's taken care of them. I'm cycling through as many of the hospitals as I can in our Tri-County area. And they'd say, sure, we'll sponsor one. So I would get the money, and it would be enough for me to hire somebody else back on my team. We'd put the food out. I'd get a note signed by community members or from their bank or whoever wanted to participate in it. I'd bring it. I'd ask them to send me pictures from the inside. I would post the pictures on social media and tag the bank and say, hey, this was brought to you today by this bank. And it would be shared and everyone would feel good about it. And the next day I'd go to their competitor and I would say, here's what they did at this bank. What do you guys want to do? And they would pick up the next delivery, right? So while my sector was down 44%, we were down 8% for the year. We built a hell of a business by doing this. And what it comes down to is getting scrappy. Like when things aren't working well, what are you going to do to turn it around? What's that personal responsibility that says, I'm not going to let this fail? And I think one of the traits I want in my franchisees is somebody who has the grit to say, I'm not going to let this fail. I'm going to do what's necessary. I'm going to get out. I'm going to go ask for the cup of sugar next door, even if it's uncomfortable for me, because I'm not going to let this fail.
Yeah, love that. You get to ask me one question, whatever it is at the end of this. So what do you got for me?
Oh, man. Well, I mean, seeing as we have a movie theater in the back, the primary question I need to know, Trent, is what is your favorite movie of all time?
So I'm not a movie guy per se.
What?
I know.
Who's not a movie person? None of them? You don't like any movies?
I know.
The whole genre's out for you?
I would probably say Gladiator, and the reason is when he's walking into the stadium and they're chanting for the Spaniard. I think that's like, as a former athlete and still a wannabe athlete, I think that's like the pinnacle of what like I would want, or it's just so cool in sport. And so I'm gonna go with the Gladiator as my favorite movie. Yeah.
I think that's an excellent answer. I hope if anyone's listening to this and what I'm saying resonates with you, that you'll reach out. I mean, I think I'm excited to grow. I'm excited to find the right people. I think the benefit of being a trailblazer and an early franchisee is you've got the territories are available and the accessibility to leadership is there. And this is a really exciting time to get involved. So if it's something that sparks an interest, reach out.
Yeah, I love the concept. I think that a lot of times you'll look at a franchise and you'll see, okay, you're going to go start this thing in a strip mall and you're going to do exactly what that is. But even when you look at your background and you look at the concept of bringing in that creativity into a business model is so cool, and so excited to watch it grow and visit one soon too. So congrats on all you do. And I think the best part about it is you get to do it with your husband and your father, and I think there's something really special about that in the world that I like to see, and I hope that more of that happens. So it's cool to see. So thanks for spending time with me.